Hey, listen to that. All right. So we are in 1 Samuel chapter 6. I think we're in 6.
Yeah. The ark returning to Israel.
Yeah. Chapter 6, yes. So remember that last week we heard that um, the Philistines drew up against the Israelites. The Israelites went out and said, we can take care of them, and they didn't. And Phinehas and Hophni, the sons of Eli, went out with the ark and all that, and the ark was captured, and in the process, Phinehas and Hophni lost their lives. When Eli heard that the ark had been taken, he fell over backwards in his chair and broke his neck. And when Phinehas' wife heard that the ark had been captured, she proceeded to give birth and die. So, I mean, that's the gist. So that's where we're at. So, the ark of the Lord was in the custody or whatever of the Philistines 7 months. So 7 months. 7 months. Then the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners and said, "What shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us what we should send with it. Tell us what we should send with it to its place." Yeah. They said, "If you send away the ark of the God of Israel, do not send it empty, but by all means return him a guilt offering. Then you will be healed and will be ransomed. Will not his hand then turn from you?" And they said, "What is the guilt offering that we shall return to him?" They answered, 5 gold tumors and 5 gold mice, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines. For the same plague was upon all of you and upon your lords. So you must make images of your tumors and images of your mice that ravage the land, and give glory to the God of Israel. Perhaps he will lighten his hand on you and your gods and your land. So we heard last week that, when the Philistines took it, they kept sending it from camp, or city to city to city, and it just wasn't working out for them anywhere it went. 7 months they put up with this. And last week we said that, the word that is used for the tumors was buboes or whatever. So there were some questions as to what kind of plague that was. Some scholars think it was excuse the pun, but a rash of hemorrhoids. Some of it was the plague, and the plague is really like bubonic plague. That's one of those things that is really sticking with most scholars because of this idea of mice. Well, they're sending back these mice, these 5 gold mice.
My translation says rats.
Rats, same concept, rodents. But if it was just 5 gold mice, we'd make it into question. But it's this phrase here that says, "images of your mice that ravage the land." So apparently part of the plague is that rats or mice have infested the land. And of course, we know from our own world history that rats or mice and rodents, they carry diseases, basically with fleas, with their own.
Dollar General is in trouble right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So they decide that the only way, their solution to fix this problem of this God of Israel, is to make more idols. I mean, think about that. Yeah. Thanks to their own priests and diviners. Yeah. Why should you harden your hearts like the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts after he had made fools of them? Did they not let the people go and they departed? Now then, get ready a new cart and 2 milk cows that have never borne a yoke, and yoke the cows to the cart, but take their calves home and away from them. Take the ark of the Lord, place it on the cart, and put it in a box. Put in a box at its side the figures of gold which you are returning to him as a guilt offering. Then send it off and let it go its way. And watch. If it goes up on the way to its own land, to Beth Shemesh, then it is he who has done us this great harm. But if not, then we shall know that it is not his hand that struck us. It happened to us by chance.
You're going to send it off with no leadership?
Correct.
No
Correct.
leadership, no direction.
Correct. Yeah, they know, as we said last week, they know the history of Israel. They know what happened to Israel coming out of Egypt. That it was eventually a series of plagues that caused Pharaoh to let them go. But we've got here this thing about very specific details. You're going to get a new cart. You're going to put two milk cows. So
Not oxen.
correct. They've never been yoked at all, let alone yoked together. They're going to take their calves away from them. So they're
They'll be
mama
happy.
cows. And they're going to send them on their way to Beth Shemesh, which is the nearest city to them, about 6 miles away. And they're going to watch to see where those cows go. If they're still thinking, hey, there's still a chance that it just happened by coincidence. That God of Israel is nothing. But if the cows follow that path without going any other direction, we know it had to be their God. So let's see what happens. The men. I want to go back real quick. You notice that it said, and put in a box at its side the figures of gold, which are returning as a guilt offering. They didn't open the ark. They didn't open the Ark of the Covenant. Whether we don't know whether that was through ignorance, they didn't know they could open it, or whether it was an awe or reverence for the ark. Who knows? But that comes into play in a little bit. So the men did so. They took 2 milch cows and yoked them to the cart and shut up their calves at home. They put the ark of the Lord on the cart and the box with the gold mice and the images of their tumors. Why would anyone make that? I just can't figure that out. Okay. The cows went straight in the direction of Beth Shemesh along one highway, lowing as they went, and they turned neither to the right nor to the left, and the lords of the Philistines went after them as far as the border of Beth Shemesh. So these 2 milk cows, never yoked, never teamed together, yearning for their calves, because they're lowing here as they go, never stopping to feed themselves. And in a sense, while with their lowing, they're announcing their arrival. It's like a trolley car on its path. Just ding, ding, next stop, Beth Shemesh. Now, the people of Beth Shemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley. When they looked up and saw the ark, they went with rejoicing to meet it. The cart came into the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh, stopped there. A large stone was there, so they split up the wood of the cart and offered the cows as a burnt offering to the Lord. The Levites, that's important here in a moment, took down the ark of the Lord and the box that was beside it, in which were the gold objects, and set them upon the large stone. Then the people of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offerings and presented sacrifices on that day to the Lord. When the 5 lords of the Philistines saw it, they returned that day to Ekron. So wheat harvest took place sometime in mid-June, and we know that the Philistines had it for 7 months, according to the text here. So the battle took place in mid-November. What should that say? What do we know anything about the battle tactics of Israel later on? They usually go to battle in the spring. So to go out mid-November was odd for them. So take that as you will. I said about 6 or 7 miles. This says 10 miles here from Ekron to Beth Shemesh. It's a Levite city, and that's based on, it says that Levites took down the ark of the Lord. Beth Shemesh was mentioned as one of those cities given to the Levites for their own living, because the tribe of Levi was not given any land. They were not given any possessions when they came out of Egypt. They were to be taken care of by the other tribes. And so Beth Shemesh is one of these Levite cities. So I think God's working there, that the ark would go straight to a Levite city. But we see here that they tear up the cart. They use the wood to build a stoke of fire and build a burnt offering there. They sacrifice the cows, not the bulls. They don't. And they didn't do it at the tabernacle or the place of the main altar. Well, that's a no-no, because Leviticus 1 specifically tells them that they have to be male bulls, and that burnt offering can only be done that particular guilt offering can only be done at the main altar.
And it also seems dumb to burn the cart because they're gonna have to leave it in this spot because there's not gonna be a good way to move it.
Well, my guess is it has to do with the wheat harvest. They're using all their other carts for, of course, that brings up a whole other thing. Why not just use the cart for something else? But my guess is that they realize it's a burnt offering, because how would the Philistines know that it was going to be used for that? They're hoping. Yeah, that's the wonderful thing about the Bible, is it brings up a lot more questions than answers sometimes, but that makes us look for answers, I guess. So these are the gold tumors which the Philistines returned as a guilt offering to the Lord. One for Ashdod, one for Gaza, one for Ashkelon, one for Gath, one for Ekron. Also the gold mice, according to the number of all the cities of the Philistines belonging to the five lords, both fortified cities and walled villages. The great stone beside which they set down the ark of the Lord is a witness to this day in the field of Joshua of Bethshemesh. So each of those gold tumors represented a city. The five, which is funny. I think I mentioned it last week that the Philistia had five great cities, but there were actually six that were named. So anyway, it mentions five here. The other one is like Ashkala or something like that. So anyway, or Allah Kame, or yeah, something like that. It starts with an A. It starts with two A's. AA. So. The great stone side. Okay, so it's just describing what these gold tumors and mice are. This is a representation of Dagon. We mentioned him last week or week before. Dagon was their main deity of the Philistines. He was like their god above the other gods of Israel. Each of the cities had their own little city god, but Dagon was the one above them all. Dagon was called the fish god, even though he was over wheat and harvest and things. This is a representation of one of the tapestries that was found, they believe, from that time period, representing Dagon here. You'll notice the fish scales along the back.
Got a watch on him.
Yeah, he's
And a
wearing
purse.
a Rolex.
Matching purse.
That's actually a lantern. It's actually a lantern. So anyway, I just thought I'd like to see that. Okay. The descendants of Jeconiah did not rejoice with the people of Bethshemesh when they greeted the ark of the Lord, and he killed 70 men of them. Anybody have anything additional to that?
No, wait a minute, this says, but God struck down some of the men of Bethshemesh,
Okay.
putting 70 of them to death because they looked into the ark of the Lord.
Okay.
Ooh.
Now, okay. Certain translations take different things. If you look, I've got my little note at the bottom, killed because they looked into the ark.
Yeah.
That is only mentioned in the Septuagint. So we know where your translation got their information. But the NRSV didn't use that information. They didn't use the Septuagint. Or at least probably NIV.
But God struck down some of the men of Bethshemesh. God struck them down, putting 70 of them to death because they had looked into the ark of the Lord. The people mourned because of the heavy blow the Lord had dealt them. And the men of Bethshemesh asked, who can stand in the presence of the Lord, this holy God? To whom will the ark go up from here?
Okay. Yeah. So that we may be rid of him. And so they sent messengers to the inhabitants of Kiriath Jearim, saying, the Philistines have returned the ark of the Lord. Come down and take it up to you.
Now these are these Levites in Bethshemesh?
Most of them are Levites, yes. And so Jeconiah is also a Levite. And this says, or he was one of those priestly people from way back when. So the descendants of Jeconiah, also Levites, they get mad when some of the people apparently running to the ark, rejoicing that it arrived, looked into the ark, which was a no-no. And so, right, they're struck dead. Now, does it say how many? Killed 70 men of them. Some translations say, have a whole lot larger number. And so the people mourn. And of course, this says because the Lord had made a great slaughter among the people. So they feel they don't want the ark in their presence anymore. So they're going to send it away. Starting to sound familiar.
So even the Israelites don't want the ark.
Right. Well, it's because of their own doing. But yeah, I guess you could say the same thing for the Philistines, because of their own doing. So they also, just like the Philistines, they want to distance themselves from God. If you want to theologize this, they're wanting to get away from God. They still believe, but God, maybe the people of Kiriath Jearim need you more than we do. So, and the people of Kiriath Jearim came down, took up the ark of the Lord, and brought it to the house of Abinadab on the hill. They consecrated his son Eleazar to have charge of the ark of the Lord. From the day that the ark was lodged at Kiriath Jearim, a long time passed, some 20 years, and all the house of Israel lamented over the Lord. Then Samuel said to,
The whole house of Israel.
Said to all the house of Israel, so you're turning to the Lord with all your heart, then put away the foreign gods and the Astartes from among you. Direct your heart to the Lord and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. So Israel put away the Baals and the Astartes, and they served the Lord only. Yep.
Can we go back? It's kind of sad to think, like you were saying, they wanted to get rid of the ark.
Mhm.
They didn't want God to be there. That's kind of sad that they were just afraid of God. There was fear there, and that was it. And that kind of says something.
Well, if he strikes down 70 of your people, you're going to be.
But isn't that sad to think about?
Oh, yeah.
That they think of God just as, fear.
Think about the writer of this as he's writing, he's relating this story. You notice he didn't say that people mourned because they had looked at the ark and sinned. It's they mourned because the Lord made great slaughter among them. So their thought is in the wrong place. Their hearts are in the wrong place. They're blaming God when it was themselves that they should have been looking at. They consecrated his son Eleazar to have charge of the ark of the Lord. Now, I made some notes here on another page. In order to consecrate someone to take place in the ark, which is from Exodus 29, they had to he was consecrated by the sacrifice of 1 bull, 2 rams, unleavened bread, cakes, and wafers. He was bathed, dressed in a coat, a robe, an ephod, a breastplate, and a girdle. He was given a mitre and a crown, and then anointing oil was poured on his head. Man, that must have taken some time and some
money,
maybe.
you
The text here said that it stayed in Kiriath Jearim for a long time, about 20 years. We know the number of 40 typically just means a long time. Well, this was a long time, but it was not as long as it could have been. So 20 years again is probably just a statement of it was there kind of a long time, is what they're saying. Longer than we would have wanted it to be. They had turned from the Lord. They were at war with the Philistines and wanted to reconcile with God. That's what happens at the end of 20 years. And we hear about that when we get to.
And they've been at war with the Philistines this whole time.
The Philistines came on the scene just before Israel got there, and they just grew into a power. They basically controlled that whole seaboard there. They're looking to expand east. So here is a look at where the travels of the ark during that time. Here, the original battle, remember the ark was housed here at Shiloh. The original battle took place right around here near Ebenezer in Aphek. It gets captured. The Philistines take it all the way down here to Ashdod. Well, they don't want it, so they send it to Gath. They don't want it. They send it to Ekron. And then Ekron sends it on this path over to Beth Shemesh. Well, it gets there, they look in it, they get pummeled by God for doing so, and then they want to send it over here to be cured. And it's there for 20 years. It says 20 years. Again, it's an estimate because it doesn't get moved from there until David is king. Well, they ain't even got a king yet. So, we've got Saul in between there. So it's what I'm getting at is the time we can't really focus so much on exact times as they're mentioned here because they were used as reference points to say, hey, it was here for a long time. Then Samuel said, there's the prophet Samuel, the judge Samuel, gather all
Said to all the house of Israel.
the houses of Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you. So they gathered at Mizpah and drew water and poured it out before the Lord. That's a water offering. They fasted that day and said, we have sinned against the Lord, and Samuel judged the people of Israel at Mizpah. So drawing and pouring water and fasting are all signs of renewal. When the Philistines heard that the people of Israel had gathered at Mizpah, those darn Philistines, the lords of the Philistines went up against Israel. Don't they learn anything? And when the people of Israel heard it, they were afraid of the Philistines. The people of Israel said to Samuel, do not cease to cry out to the Lord our God for us and pray that he may save us from the hand of the Philistines. So Samuel took a sucking lamb and offered it as a whole burnt offering to the Lord. Samuel cried out to the Lord for Israel, and the Lord answered him. As Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to attack Israel, but the Lord thundered with a mighty voice that day against the Philistines and threw them into a confusion, and they were routed before Israel. And the men of Israel went out of Mizpah and pursued the Philistines and struck them down as far as beyond Beth-kar. Now you notice this all happened without an ark. We get this idea of a Passover lamb. Thunder, said the Lord thundered with a mighty voice. And of course, we've heard that word described of God's voice before with Moses and the people of Israel coming out of Egypt. So nothing unknown to us at that point, but still, I can imagine what the Philistines thought. And this, if we look at a map of all this, I don't know if I can put a map on here or not, I can't remember. But if we look at the topography of all that, the Philistines kind of backed themselves into a corner. They only had one escape route. And it was a natural retreat path. And of course, that's where Israel just happened to come and fight them. So Philistines didn't have a choice, but they couldn't run. So then Samuel took a stone
And set it up.
and set it up
Between
Mizpah and Jeshanah, and then named it Ebenezer. So that's a different Ebenezer now. For he said, thus far the Lord has helped us. So the Philistines were subdued and did not again enter the territory of Israel. Yeah, that's not exactly true. The hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the days of Samuel. The towns the Philistines had taken from Israel were restored to Israel from Ekron to Gath. That's the area of Dan, by the way. And Israel recovered their territory from the hand of the Philistines. There was peace also between Israel and the Amorites. Now, it's funny that the writer would all of a sudden mention peace between Israel and the Amorites. The Amorites were one of those Canaanite tribes that was in the land when Israel first entered it and didn't want anything. They just kind of stepped back. They were kind of like Switzerland in World War II. We'll just let you do your thing. We're not going to get involved. So it's weird that they would be described like this right now because we ain't heard about them since Exodus. So they may come into play later.
Weren't the Israelites supposed to kill off all the native tribes? And they didn't?
That was one of the commandments. So, like I said, spoiler alert, the Amorites may come up later. So, way later. But Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. He went on a circuit year by year to Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah, and he judged Israel in all these places. Then he would come back to Ramah, for his home was there. He administered justice there to Israel and built there an altar to the Lord. So it's funny that Shiloh, which was where the altar was, it's where the ark originally was. So the altar, the main altar is there at Shiloh. Kiriath Jearim, which is now the resting place of the ark at this point, is not mentioned at all. And this goes to show that Samuel is a judge. He's not a priest. There's no need for him to go to where the ark is. or where the altar is. He's not serving in that function. He's serving as a judge. And of course, Rama. So maybe he saw mom and daddy while I was there. So chapter 8, when Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn son was Joel, and the name of his second Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba. Yet his sons did not follow in his ways. Oh gosh, here we go again.
Now, whose sons were killed earlier?
That was Eli, the chief priest.
Okay.
But turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. Now, judges, like priests, were to be appointed by God. Samuel appointed his own sons to be judges over Israel. And of course, they're judges. What do judges do? They exact justice. And they took bribes and perverted it. They looked out for themselves and no one else. Man, what is it about preachers' kids? I don't know. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, "You are old." Oh, how would you like that statement? Hey, hi Samuel, you're old. And your sons do not follow in your ways. Appoint for us then a king to govern us like other nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to govern us." It made him mad. Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, "Listen to the voice of the people and all that they say to you. For they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. Just as they have done to me from the day I brought them up out of Egypt to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so also they are doing to you. Now then, listen to their voice. Only you shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them." So they're asking, they don't want any more judges. They've had their fill of judges already. Judges have worked for them and against them, and right now they're working against them. But they've had some success over the Philistines, and so now they think, hey, we're big boys now. We can enter the international realm. So they ask for a king. Now this was talked about in Deuteronomy 17, that God told them eventually you're going to want a king. So judges were temporary. King was forever. And that's the warning that Samuel is to give them. That, I'm listening to you. If that's what you want, I will surely allow that. But keep in mind, judges are only here for a short time. You get a king, there's no going back. So Samuel reported all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking for a king. He said, "These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his courtiers. He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and his courtiers. He will take your male and female slaves and the best of your cattle and donkeys and put them to his work. He will take, he will take, he will take."
Greedy, eh?
Right, where's the give here? And it continues. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. But the people refused to listen to the voice of Samuel. They said, "No, but we are determined to have a king over us, so that we also may be like other nations, and that our king may govern us and go out before us and fight our battles." Isn't that what God was doing?
Yeah.
When Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them in the ears of the Lord. The Lord said to Samuel, "Listen to their voice and set a king over them." Samuel then said to the people of Israel, "Each of you return home."
And the king wasn't going to fight the battle. They were going to be fighting.
Well, the practice was for kings to go out with their troops to battle. That was the practice.
I mean, they were gonna be fighting too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, as long as the king was alive, the people were alive. That's what they're saying. And that's the irony here. I put that in my notes at the bottom here. That's the irony, is they're refusing the law of God. They're refusing the law of God, but yet the law of God is what a king is appointed by God. So.
If they don't want to pick their own king, right?
Well, they
want-
do, yeah, they do. That's what they're, well, you're correct. The wording here says, God, give us a king.
Right.
But that's not what happens, as we'll find out.
They just want permission to have a king.
Correct, that's right. God, give us a king, and give us one that we want to choose.
Yeah.
Is what it is. So next week, a king is chosen, anointed, and proclaimed. And a new threat is revealed. Ooh, it's like the sequel. I'd say part 2, but it's really part 4. Okay, so comments.
Very interesting.
It's just amazing. Like I said,
They
Samuel,
don't learn, do they?
no. Samuel, Kings, Chronicles, they read like a soap opera. And it's these little things that we kind of skip over. I'm sure we've all read these stories at some point, but we just don't follow the details.
Do we ever learn?
That was
Well,
my thought. We're still in that same situation.
we do, but we forget. Or if you follow all 10 commandments, if you look at the 10 commandments, which is, that's what, those were the initial 10 that God gave them. And then there were, another 355 more that were given eventually. They all focused on one thing. They all focused on that very first thing. Thou shalt have no other gods before me.
Right.
I, the Lord, am your God, and alone your God. That's it. Everything else that follows, if you read all of those, they all point back to that one.
Yep.
And not following that first one is pride.
Yep.
And pride in essence is putting something above God. So every one of those others, making a graven image, not honoring your father and mother, not keeping the Sabbath, those are all, you're placing something else above God. And that's where we get in trouble. Typically, it's a personal thing. That's why the other ones, thou shalt not commit murder, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt, all these thou shalt nots.
And then they justify and says, well, Adam, they bring it back to Adam.
But the second Adam came that we may have life. So, it's easy to place blame on others. And we saw it here in this story today. The people of Beth Shemesh placing blame, God did this to us. No, you did it to yourselves. It's a shame. It's a shame.
You wonder what God's thinking today.
I hope God's thinking, well, I know at least one thing God's thinking. Gosh, I love y'all.
Yes,
You make it so much hard.
yeah. But they take me for granted.
We do. We definitely take God's love for granted. Anyway, I hope you are
And
getting
he still
something out of
loves
this.
you, he still loves
Yes, God's love is
you.
not conditional.
Right.
Blessings may be, but love is not.
This thing with what's the people?
The Philistines,
No,
Today,
today.
the Ukrainians.
Oh.
Ukrainians. That's, I don't know what's going on there.
I sent out the email earlier this week to pray for the different elements.
Yeah.
And of course, there were a lot of comments that came back, and I know they're meant in good spirit. One of the comments was, this is an unpopular war. Well, of course it is.
Every war is unpopular.
Right,
For somebody.
for somebody. And
But you know what, I don't understand how, it goes right back to them. It falls back on them. I don't understand. It falls back on them, they get hurt, they destroyed.
it's very easy to look at Russia and say, now, we should do that, but not at the expense of forgetting the people that are being ravaged from war on. That should be our main focus. How do we protect the Ukrainian people? Instead of condemning Russia, even though we do, that should be, if we have a list of things we should do, it should be, okay, let's figure out a way to protect the Ukrainian people. Then let's take care of Russia.
Even some of the Russian people are demonstrating against this.
Yes.
They don't want it to happen.
But they're going to suffer and they know that.
Right, yeah,
It's a sad thing, That's General Sherman.
I
I
forget, but
think it's
it's
Sherman.
so true.
William Tecumseh Sherman. Anyway.
And you wonder how a nation today can make a decision to go to war.
One thing I didn't mention in my prayer, but that brings up a good point, is about those Russian soldiers who are, they're basically being ordered to do this.
Yes.
And we see similarities. I can imagine similarities to the separation of Berlin, Eastern Germany versus Western Germany. Some of these Eastern German soldiers being forced to shoot people who were trying to escape to get over to the Western side. And in some cases, there's even some pictures or stories of them actually helping people. They are disobeying the direct orders to do so at risk of their own life. So, it's.
Maybe some Russian soldiers doing that, right?
We can hope. We can hope. I will. I've got my own experiences in Kuwait, meeting POWs, and our job wasn't to kill them. It wasn't to destroy them. It was to push them back. That was the goal. Was to get them out of Kuwait. And after treating them, hydrating them for a couple of days, we would give them as much food and water as they could carry, and send them right back out. They're hundreds of miles from any civilization. They're out in the middle of the desert. What are they going to do? And so those kind of images haunt me a little bit. I don't know whether they lived or died. I do know they were alive when they left us. But what life would that have been? So, anyway.
When they came in, there were Americans and other countries moving in there to push back. We're not doing that this time, Michael. That's a real debate in my mind.
Sometimes we question preemptive things. Why? I will say I was not a very big fan of Bill Clinton. Just wasn't a fan. But he was president while I was in. He became president while I was in. And one of the things he did was it was a retaliatory strike on Iraq. And we found out after the fact that this had happened. American people found out after the fact. It was in retaliation for a threat made against the former President Bush by Iraqi subversives. And it was done preemptively to prevent another threat like that. I think there are reasons for things. I think there are sovereign and even divine reasons for things. I personally don't believe in coincidence, but I know some people do. And all I can say is that I believe God never wants more. Not even as, we read about it in the Old Testament. There are people that argue that the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament are two different gods. Or this is not the God I want to serve. They stick strictly to the New Testament. And I'm going, you've missed the point.
To the New Testament.
I don't believe necessarily it was God. And as we read further, we'll hear about things called Urim and Thummim, which are kind of like dice, or it's where the dreidel originally comes from, okay, in Jewish culture, where they, in an effort to seek God, they would use these dice and chance, trusting that God's will be done on the roll of this. Was that the way we do things now? No, we don't put things to chance. Or do we? Or do we? God, if you just do this, you get me out of this, I promise I'll never bother you again as long as I live. We do. Or God, let one of two things happen. I believe God works in our lives. At the same time, I also believe that God is unfathomably unknowable. We mentioned this at Men's Group yesterday. God, there's this idea of transcendence. Transcendence versus immanence. Transcendence means God is so far out that God can't be understood in a human capacity. But immanence dictates that God is with us, and we have that in incarnation of Christ, that God is with us. And so there comes a time, or times, when God's transcendence intersects God's immanence, and we see those glimpses of eternity. And so, do I believe that these Urim and Thummim acted as God's way of telling them? I think so. Does that necessarily work for us today? Maybe. I wouldn't bank on it, but I wouldn't do that. I seek God in prayer and trust that God is working through me. What I do know is that every good thing, every good gift is from the Father above. And that doesn't mean that bad things won't happen. But I know that everything good that happens is from God. Okay, I gotta get to my practice. I'm gonna end this. Thank you.